October 16th, 1793, 4:30 in the morning. In a cell so damp the walls weep, a woman wakes to her final day alive. She's 37 years old, but if you saw her, you'd think she was 60. Her hair, once the envy of Europe, powdered, adorned with feathers and diamonds, styled into sculptures that took 3 hours to complete, is now completely white, thin, brittle, falling out in clumps. Not from age, from fear. Her body is shutting down. For months she's been hemorrhaging, bleeding through her clothes, through the thin mattress on the floor. The guards have watched it happen. They were ordered to watch. No privacy, not even to suffer. She can barely stand with dizziness. Her hands shake as she reaches for the white cotton gown laid out for her. No silk, no lace, no servants to help her dress. Just rough, plain fabric, the kind a peasant would wear. She puts it on herself, alone, in the dark. Her name is Marie Antoinette, and in less than 8 hours, a blade will fall, and her head will tumble into a basket while thousands cheer. But here's what they don't tell you. Here's what gets left out of every history textbook, every documentary, every dramatic retelling. The guillotine was the easy part. Because what they did to Marie Antoinette before that execution, what they did to her in the shadows, in the cells, in the propaganda mills, that was the real punishment. They didn't just kill her, they destroyed her, slowly, deliberately, piece by piece. Let me paint you a picture of the contrast. Rewind 20 years. Same woman, different world. Marie Antoinette walks through the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. Her gown weighs 30 pounds, embroidered with real gold thread. Her jewelry could buy a village. Men bow as she passes. Women curtsy so low their knees touch marble. She is the Queen of France, the most powerful woman in the most powerful nation on earth. Ambassadors travel for months just to be in her presence. Artists beg to paint her. Poets write verses about her beauty. Every move she makes becomes fashion across Europe. She is everything. Now, fast forward to that cell. The same woman sits on a pile of filthy straw, too weak to stand for more than a few minutes. She hasn't bathed properly in weeks. Her undergarments are stained with blood and waste. The guards mock her, call her names, watch her use a bucket in the corner. She is no longer a queen. She is no longer a woman. She is public enemy number 1. But here's the question nobody wants to ask. What did she actually do? Yes, she lived in luxury while people starved. Yes, she was tone-deaf to suffering. Yes, she made catastrophic political mistakes. But so did every king, every nobleman, every man in power. So why was she the one they needed to humiliate before they killed her? Why was she the one they stripped, starved, and bled out in a cell? Why did they sexualize her in pornographic pamphlets? Why did they accuse her of incest with her own child? Why did they parade her through the streets with her hands tied, her head shaved, sitting backward on a cart so the crowd could spit on her? Because here's the truth they don't teach you. Marie Antoinette wasn't executed for crimes. She was sacrificed. Sacrificed to satisfy a collapsing empire that needed someone to blame, someone to punish, someone whose suffering could be displayed as proof that the old world was dead. And empires have always found it easiest to sacrifice women, because a woman's humiliation sends a stronger message than a man's death. When you execute a king, you challenge power. When you destroy a queen, when you strip her, shame her, sexualize her, break her down until she's unrecognizable, you don't just challenge power, you erase it. You say, this is what happens when a woman dares to be visible. This is what happens when a woman represents something we hate. And they hated what Marie Antoinette represented, not because she was evil, because she was convenient. The revolution needed a villain. And a foreign woman draped in diamonds, speaking with an Austrian accent. Perfect. They could project every sin of the monarchy onto her, every economic failure, every military defeat, every piece of corruption. Never mind that she had no real political power. Never mind that the king made the decisions. Never mind that she was a pawn in a system designed by men. She was visible, and visible women make excellent scapegoats. So they destroyed her reputation first, flooded Paris with pornographic cartoons showing her in orgies, in lesbian affairs, committing incest. They didn't need proof. They just needed people to believe she was a monster. Then they imprisoned her, took her children, let her bleed and rot in a cell while guards watched her sleep. Then they put her on trial, a trial where the verdict was already written. And then, only then, after they'd stripped away every shred of her humanity, they killed her. But the execution, that was just the final act. The real cruelty happened in the invisible hours, the months of psychological torture, the weaponization of her body, her reputation, her motherhood. That's what they did to Marie Antoinette before the guillotine. And today, we're going to walk through every horrifying detail, because this isn't just a story about one woman. This is a story about what empires do to women when they need someone to blame. And if you think this kind of cruelty is ancient history, you haven't been paying attention. So let me ask you again, was Marie Antoinette a criminal who deserved to die, or was she a convenient sacrifice for a revolution that needed blood? By the end of this video, you'll have your answer. But I'm warning you now, it's not the one they taught you in school. Let's go back, not to the guillotine, to the beginning, to the moment a 14-year-old girl was sold like livestock to a foreign empire, because that's where the cruelty really started. At 14 years old, Marie Antoinette was not consulted. She was informed. In royal Europe, children of dynasties were not raised to choose their futures. They were raised to fulfill them. And Marie Antoinette's future had already been decided in rooms she would never enter, by men who would never know her. She was born an Austrian archduchess, one of many children, useful not for who she was, but for what she could represent. France and Austria needed peace, and so a marriage was arranged. Not as a union between two people, but as a political solution. Marie Antoinette was 14 years old when she was selected to embody that solution. From that moment, her life stopped being personal. Every lesson she received had a purpose. Every behavior was corrected. Every flaw was noted. She was trained to be agreeable, to be visible but not independent, to represent harmony between rival empires. This was not preparation for leadership. It was preparation for symbolism. When she crossed into France, the message was made clear. At the border, she was separated from everything familiar. Her clothing was changed, her attendants dismissed, her possessions removed. She was told politely that she was no longer Austrian. She was no longer allowed to be who she had been. She was now French property. This ritual was celebrated as tradition, but in reality, it was a lesson. Identity could be removed, belonging could be reassigned, and compliance was expected. She was 14 years old. Versailles awaited her, a place remembered as beautiful, but designed for observation. Versailles was not built for privacy. It was built to be watched. Every movement mattered. Every routine was visible. Silence was noticed. Laughter was recorded. From the moment Marie Antoinette arrived, her life became public. She did not wake alone. She did not dress alone. She did not exist unseen. And yet, despite this constant attention, she held no authority. She was a queen in title, but not in power. Her marriage quickly became a matter of concern, not because of affection, not because of happiness, but because of expectation. She was expected to secure the future of the French crown, and that expectation followed her everywhere, into conversations, into gossip, into official correspondence. When months passed without an heir, scrutiny intensified. Whispers began. Reports were written. Questions were asked. And once again, responsibility fell in one direction, toward her. In royal systems, failures were rarely attributed upward. They were assigned to the most visible figure who lacked protection. In this case, that figure was a teenage foreign queen. Marie Antoinette was isolated. She lived among people who spoke her language but not her loyalties. She was surrounded by ceremony but deprived of trust. Her letters were monitored, her friendships evaluated, her behavior interpreted. Even her expressions were analyzed. Too cheerful, and she was careless. Too reserved, and she was arrogant. There was no correct version of her, only acceptable ones. Being foreign made this worse. To many in France, she was never truly theirs. She represented compromise, an uneasy alliance, a reminder of old conflicts. She was labeled before she acted. Mistakes were expected. Failures were anticipated. Suspicion came first. This distrust did not fade with time. It hardened. And as public discontent grew, it needed a face. Marie Antoinette was visible, so she became useful. Her life was observed at every level. Servants reported routines, nobles shared rumors, political factions reshaped her image to suit their needs. What she wore mattered, who she spoke to mattered, how she spent time mattered. None of it was neutral. Nothing was private. She learned quickly that silence did not protect her, neither did obedience. Even restraint was treated as guilt. This was not accidental. This was control through exposure. The cruelty of this system was not dramatic. It was procedural. A system that removed choice, that denied agency, that blamed individuals for structural failure. Marie Antoinette did not govern France. France governed Marie Antoinette. Her role was fixed, her expectations narrow, her margin for error non-existent. For a time, she believed improvement was possible, that better behavior would lead to acceptance, that restraint would quiet criticism, that adaptation would earn safety. This belief is common among those placed in impossible roles. They are taught to internalize punishment, to assume responsibility for outcomes they do not control. Marie Antoinette had not yet realized the truth. She was not meant to succeed. She was meant to represent stability and absorb frustration. And when stability failed, someone had to answer for it. She was never prepared to rule. She was prepared to symbolize. And symbols, when they lose their usefulness, are rarely spared. By the time France began to fracture under hunger and inequality, Marie Antoinette had already been shaped into something very specific. A figure the state could point to, a presence it could blame, a woman it could control, and eventually, a woman it could destroy.
Marie Antoinette's reputation was under attack long before the revolution reached its peak. It began not in the courtroom, not in the streets. It began on paper. Pamphlets, broadsheets, and anonymous letters circulated across France. These were not simple criticisms. They were carefully constructed stories designed to shock, to provoke anger, to make the public see the Queen not as a person, but as a symbol of corruption. These publications were called libelles. Libelles were short, easy to read, and often illustrated. They spread quickly, and they spread lies. They claimed the Queen engaged in activities that were impossible, absurd, or deeply offensive to public morals. They claimed she violated family ties, that she behaved in ways no decent woman should, that she acted with a kind of luxury and indulgence that marked her as immoral. The goal was not accuracy. The goal was outrage. Public anger was easier to manipulate than public understanding. At first, the rumors were whispered, in salons, in markets, in the courts. But the libelles made them permanent. They gave them a voice and an audience. They turned whispers into convictions. Some accused Marie Antoinette of having relationships that were impossible. Others claimed she took part in gatherings that were scandalous and lewd. Still others said she showed favoritism to women in ways that implied inappropriate intimacy. These stories were not verified. They were not debated. They were meant to stick, to make people look at the queen and see immorality before they saw royalty. Her body became a public stage, not in a medical sense, not in a private sense, but in a political sense. Every rumor about her appearance, habits, or private life reinforced a single idea: that she existed for public judgment, not personal dignity. Foreign-born women were especially vulnerable. They arrived in courts where they were already outsiders. Their accent, their manners, their clothes, and even their hairstyles were scrutinized. Marie Antoinette's Austrian origins made her an easy target. And so she was. The public came to see her not as a queen, but as a threat to morality, a foreign interloper, and a figure of indulgence. The libels were effective because they were visual as well as textual. Some pamphlets included drawings of the queen in exaggerated, offensive scenes. Others depicted her in ways that suggested excess and vice. Even readers who knew little about the court or politics could form a strong opinion, and often that opinion was hatred. The goal of this propaganda was clear. Before the revolution ever reached the guillotine, Marie Antoinette was already being prepared for punishment. Her public image was shaped so that when charges were eventually brought, they would seem natural. The people would not ask whether she was guilty. They would assume it. This is a tactic still used today in politics and media. Destroy the character first. The verdict will follow naturally. The attacks went beyond reputation. They reached into her personal space. Allegations about family relationships were particularly cruel. False stories suggested she harmed or endangered those closest to her. Some libels claimed inappropriate behavior with her children, a claim as horrifying as it was false. These lies were designed to provoke emotional disgust, not legal consequences, not evidence, but disgust. Because when the public feels disgust, it abandons reason. And when reason is abandoned, power can act without restraint. Even the courts and political leaders could not fully shield her. The rumors were used strategically. They justified increased surveillance. They shaped policies around her behavior. They reinforced the idea that Marie Antoinette was a danger to the state, not merely a young queen trying to survive in an impossible system. She had already been made visible in Part 2, observed and constrained at every turn. Now she was made vulnerable in reputation, with no defense against an army of writers, illustrators, and political enemies. It is important to understand that the queen's body was treated as public property, not physically, but symbolically. Her appearance, her clothing, her routines, and even her gestures were evaluated for morality and propriety. A misstep could become a scandal. A word misheard could become a libel. Every action she took was rewritten to serve the story others wanted told. The combination of foreign origin, youth, and visibility created the perfect storm. Her critics knew the public would respond to emotional triggers: lust, shame, moral failure, and indulgence. Allegations of sexual misconduct were particularly effective. Claims of orgies, incest, and other offenses were repeated in print and conversation. None of these claims were true, yet they persisted, and with each repetition, the queen's credibility was further eroded. By the time she was formally accused of crimes against the state, her image had already been tarnished beyond repair. Why did these libels work so well? Because moral outrage is easier to sell than truth. The public did not need evidence to believe the stories. They were preconditioned to expect extravagance and corruption from royalty. They were primed to see excess in women of power, particularly foreign women. And they were hungry for a narrative that explained suffering in simple terms. A queen who enjoys life, spends lavishly, or acts outside expectations is guilty. This simplified moral lens made complex political and economic crises easy to assign blame. Marie Antoinette became the face of every problem that troubled France, from debt to famine. And the irony is chilling.
She had very little control over these crises. Her life was constrained, her decisions limited, yet she absorbed the anger anyway. The destruction of her reputation preceded the destruction of her life. It's a dark pattern repeated throughout history. Make a figure visible. Attack their character relentlessly. Ensure the public sees them as guilty before any trial. Then carry out punishment. By the time the revolution executed Marie Antoinette, the public had long been trained to hate her. The guillotine became the final act, but the first executions were already complete, in paper, rumor, and perception. This is the most important lesson from Marie Antoinette's life in this period. Character assassination came first, execution came later. Her story reminds us that when women gain visibility in power structures, they are often attacked in ways men rarely are. They are vilified for their bodies, their words, their relationships, and their choices. They are painted as dangerous or immoral before any action has been taken. For Marie Antoinette, the labels were not just rumors, they were weapons. They were part of a system designed to strip her of agency and reputation simultaneously. The queen who arrived in France as a young girl, trained to symbolize an alliance, now had her image weaponized against her. She was controlled, she was observed, and she was publicly shamed, all before a single official charge was ever made. By the end of this campaign, the public did not need to ask whether she was guilty. They believed it instinctively. And in that moment, the machinery of the revolution could do the rest.
The revolution had begun, and with it came a new reality for Marie Antoinette. She was no longer a queen. She was a prisoner. The arrest itself was swift, public, and humiliating. Officials entered her home with authority, leaving no room for negotiation. She was separated from the life she knew, from the palace she had grown into, and most painfully, from her family. Her children, once her pride and her anchor, were taken from her. Her young son, the Dauphin, became a symbol, a bargaining chip, a reminder that her maternal role was now under control of the state. Every mother's instinct to protect and nurture was weaponized against her. Marie Antoinette experienced the cruel reality of powerlessness firsthand. Every bond, every comfort, every sense of normalcy was stripped away. Her new environment was harsh, unfamiliar, and intentionally degrading. She was placed in the conciergerie, a prison meant for the worst offenders. The conditions were filthy: cold stone floors, crowded cells, unwashed clothing, limited access to fresh water. The guards were not merely enforcers, they were instruments of control. They observed her constantly. Even the most private moments, like sleep or using the restroom, were monitored. Nothing was left to dignity, nothing was left to privacy. Her health began to deteriorate quickly. Years of stress, deprivation, and constant scrutiny had already weakened her. Now the prison itself became a physical threat. Illnesses went untreated, minor infections grew dangerous. Bleeding and exhaustion took hold, unchecked by anyone. The separation from her family was perhaps the most agonizing aspect. Marie Antoinette had been used to the structures of court life, where her son's presence was a source of pride and reassurance. Now he was removed, made almost invisible. The state leveraged this loss to control her behavior. Every plea, every expression of maternal concern was twisted into evidence of indulgence, distraction, or incompetence. She learned the harshest lesson of imprisonment. Power over life can be exercised through absence. By taking away what mattered most, the authorities forced compliance without words. Physical suffering was compounded by psychological torment. Her cellmates and guards were strategically placed to remind her of her isolation. Conversations could be overheard, allies were watched, trust became impossible. Every day reinforced her vulnerability. Every night reminded her of the fragility of life under this regime. The smallest indignities became tools of psychological erosion. She was forced to eat in public. She was moved at irregular hours. Her possessions were limited, inspected, or confiscated. The intent was clear. She was to be stripped of identity. Every habit, every preference, every small comfort was removed to remind her, you are no longer a queen. You are only a subject. And even as a subject, you are constantly observed. Her physical deterioration was visible. She lost weight. Her hair became unkempt. Illness left marks on her skin and body. She bled, a sign of untreated health issues. The combination of malnutrition, stress, and neglect made her vulnerable to every disease that touched the prison walls. And yet, even in this state, the psychological toll was heavier. She was surrounded by walls and people meant to remind her of her diminished status. The constant observation, the inability to move freely, and the knowledge that her family could not intervene created a sense of despair. This was not just a prison. It was a system designed to erase her dignity long before any execution. The guards themselves were part of this system. They were instructed to watch her at all times. They documented her routines. They reported any perceived weakness or disobedience. Even acts as basic as sleep or using the toilet became matters of record. Privacy was non-existent. Humanity was irrelevant. Through these measures, Marie Antoinette learned that survival required complete submission. But submission did not protect her. It did not improve her conditions. It only highlighted the control her captors held. Her identity, once tied to crowns, gowns, and public spectacle, was reduced to her presence in a cell. She had been a queen. She had been visible to the world, observed, celebrated, criticized. Now she was isolated and powerless. The transition was not immediate. It was a slow, grinding erosion. Each day stripped away her social armor. Each insult, observation, and deprivation chipped at her sense of self. By the time she faced her trial, the physical and psychological breakdown had already begun. The punishment had started long before the guillotine. Every moment of imprisonment was part of a prelude. Every denial, every loss, every humiliation prepared her for the inevitable conclusion. Her health continued to decline. She became prone to infections. Minor injuries worsened. Her immune system weakened. And yet she was constantly required to maintain composure, to answer interrogations, to follow orders. Every command reinforced her dependency. Every observation reminded her of her confinement. Even as her strength waned, her resolve was tested. She was forced to confront not only the external control of guards and officials, but the internal pressure of fear and despair. Isolation intensified suffering. Separation from loved ones magnified vulnerability, and the knowledge that her own survival was uncertain created a profound psychological burden. The story of Marie Antoinette's imprisonment is a story of systematic cruelty. Not a sudden act of violence, not a single public execution, but a methodical, deliberate process. Every measure was intended to diminish her body, her spirit, and her will. Every deprivation was part of a larger plan. The guillotine, when it finally arrived, was only the final act. The process of punishment had already begun years earlier. Her reputation had been attacked, her autonomy stripped, her health deteriorated, her dignity erased. And this slow, relentless preparation made the final execution almost inevitable. For viewers, the lesson is clear. Punishment does not always begin with the sword. It can begin with control, isolation, observation, and deprivation. It can begin with the removal of family, health, and dignity. Marie Antoinette's imprisonment demonstrates that systemic cruelty is often invisible at first, building quietly and relentlessly. By the time history records her death, her suffering had already lasted months. Her body and mind had been broken before the public ever saw the blade. And yet, despite this, she remained human.
She remained conscious of injustice. She maintained traces of her identity. Even in the face of psychological and physical torture, her story is one of endurance, a testament to the human capacity to survive the slowest forms of cruelty. By the time Marie Antoinette was brought to trial, the outcome had already been determined. The revolutionary government had decided she must fall. The trial was not a search for truth, it was a performance. From the moment proceedings began, it was clear that this was theater disguised as justice. The courtroom was filled with officials, scribes, and spectators. Every question, every piece of evidence had been pre-selected. The judges were predetermined. The verdict was certain. And yet, Marie Antoinette faced it as she had faced every challenge in her life, with dignity and composure. She had no proper legal defense. Lawyers assigned to her case were limited in scope and influence. They could make procedural objections, they could request delays, but they could not prevent the trial from functioning as a spectacle. Every document, every testimony was structured to condemn her. The accusations were extreme, designed to shock and disgust the public. Among them, the most infamous was the allegation of incest with her son, a claim both absurd and cruel. No credible evidence supported it. No witness could confirm it. It was entirely a product of rumor, manipulation, and political calculation, and yet it was presented in court as fact. It was meant to humiliate her completely, to turn the public against her, to make the execution seem deserved. Even in the face of such allegations, Marie Antoinette showed remarkable courage. She defended herself with rare clarity and eloquence. When questioned about her actions, she spoke calmly, logically, and forcefully. She addressed each accusation without panic or rage. Her words were measured, her tone was deliberate, and for a moment she reclaimed some of the agency that the system had so thoroughly denied her. In her statements, she reminded the court of simple truths. She was a mother, she was a queen, she had acted within her means and intentions. For a brief moment, she transformed the spectacle of her trial into a testimony of human dignity. The public reaction was striking, not with applause or approval, but with silence. Even those who had despised her, even those eager to see her condemned, could not fully ignore the courage and composure she displayed. Her words exposed the inhumanity of the process. They revealed the cruel efficiency of a system that had already decided her fate. The audience, trained to hate her, experienced a moment of conflicted recognition. Some could see that the charges were exaggerated, false, and cruel. Some could see that a woman, stripped of power and isolated, was standing up for herself with nothing but her voice. This silence became part of the narrative. It was as telling as any testimony. It underscored the gap between law and justice, between procedure and morality. The trial proceedings themselves were designed to humiliate. Questions were asked in ways meant to provoke fear or confusion. Witnesses presented stories of her alleged indulgence, extravagance, or wrongdoing. Even minor behaviors were presented as crimes. Her clothing, her gestures, her demeanor, all were scrutinized. She was made to explain things that should have been private or inconsequential. Everything about her existence became evidence against her. Her life, her history, and even her intentions were treated as guilt. This is a hallmark of institutional cruelty. When the rules are rigged, appearances become sufficient for condemnation, and when a person is already isolated and vulnerable, their voice is almost powerless. Even as the accusations mounted, Marie Antoinette demonstrated rare verbal power. She defended her dignity in a system designed to erase it. She answered calmly, without begging or pleading. She used logic and clarity to counter absurd claims. She reminded the audience that she was human, a mother, a queen, not a monster. Her words were carefully measured. They could not overturn the verdict, but they revealed her strength in the face of systemic cruelty. And in that moment, the human cost of the trial became undeniable. The incest allegation remains the most shocking aspect of the trial.
It was entirely false. It was designed to provoke moral outrage. It was weaponized against a mother whose child had already been used as leverage. This tactic was part of a broader pattern. Powerful institutions often attack women's roles as mothers and caretakers to amplify guilt and public shame. By targeting her family connections, the revolutionists aimed to erode her credibility and morality completely. The public had been conditioned for months, years even, to see her as corrupt and indulgent. Now, with the trial, they were given proof, fabricated, exaggerated, or misinterpreted, that justified pre-existing hatred. The courtroom itself reflected the theatricality of the proceedings. Seats were arranged to maximize public view. Every gesture was visible. Every answer was recorded. Every reaction could be interpreted as guilt or submission. The trial was a stage. Marie Antoinette was both the performer and the victim. Even her enemies recognized it. For a moment, the inhumanity of what was happening became visible. Even the most committed revolutionaries had to confront the fact that a human being was being judged on lies and spectacle rather than fact. This rare acknowledgement was fleeting. It did not change the outcome. It did, however, mark the trial as something more than simple legal procedure. It was a calculated demonstration of power. The lesson of this trial is clear. Institutional cruelty is most effective when it disguises itself as fairness. The system had all the trappings of justice. Documents, witnesses, and procedures gave the appearance of legality, but the outcome had already been determined. Marie Antoinette's defense, though powerful, could not overcome the weight of pre-existing bias, propaganda, and political calculation. Her trial was less about proving guilt and more about demonstrating control. It was a warning to others. Those who stand in the way of political objectives, especially women, can be publicly destroyed before any real evidence is considered. By the end of the proceedings, Marie Antoinette had achieved something remarkable. She had reminded the audience, even briefly, of her humanity. She had shown courage in the face of absurd accusations. She had maintained dignity under extreme duress. And in so doing, she exposed the cruelty of a system that preferred spectacle over justice, accusation over truth. Even the harshest critics could not completely deny the injustice. For a brief moment, the Queen's voice pierced the machinery of the revolution. It was a reminder that the real crime was not hers, but the deliberate manipulation of truth by those in power. The trial was a prelude. The verdict was inevitable. The execution awaited. But the lesson extends beyond the guillotine. Marie Antoinette's experience demonstrates how institutions can weaponize procedure, perception, and accusation to control, humiliate, and destroy. Her enemies saw it. The public witnessed it, and history has preserved it. Even in defeat, the Queen's rare moment of defense remains a powerful testimony. Humanity, reason, and courage can shine even in the darkest performance of injustice.
By the time the blade fell, Marie Antoinette had already become more than a person. She had become a symbol, a figure onto which the anger, fear, and frustration of an entire nation were projected. The revolution did not only want her death, it wanted a message, a lesson for every observer, a warning for those who might be perceived as untouchable. Her execution was not about justice, it was about purification, a symbolic act meant to erase everything she represented: luxury, foreign influence, monarchy, visibility. Marie Antoinette's story reminds us that powerful institutions often punish women to send messages. Throughout history, visible women, those who occupy public roles, command attention, or symbolize influence, have been made examples. Punishment often precedes or substitutes for justice. It is not always the person who is guilty, it is the idea they represent. Her life and death demonstrate that women are rarely attacked for their actions alone. They are attacked for existence in spaces of power, for visibility, and for being convenient symbols. This is why her story cannot be framed simply as innocence or guilt. Marie Antoinette was not a saint. She was not free from the privileges and limitations of her station. She was not perfect, but she was also not the monster her enemies claimed. She was a convenient sacrifice, a figure onto which the revolution projected all its fears, frustrations, and ideological demands. Her execution satisfied the public appetite for spectacle, for moral cleansing, for closure in a world that had grown chaotic. The punishment she endured, from childhood, from forced marriage, from court intrigue, from propaganda, to imprisonment, to trial, culminated in the guillotine. And yet it is clear that the real penalty began long before the executioner's blade. Her reputation, health, dignity, and agency had been systematically destroyed over years. Death was only the final punctuation. We must also reflect on the broader pattern this represents. Empires, revolutions, and political systems often use women as symbols rather than as individuals. They are traded, blamed, humiliated, and sometimes sacrificed to demonstrate authority, enforce compliance, or distract from systemic failures. Marie Antoinette's life and death are an example of this. She did not die because she had done something unprecedented. She did not die because she had committed crimes warranting a fair trial. She died because she was visible, because she was a target onto which collective fear, anger, and ideology could be projected, because her existence in the public eye made her dangerous, not politically, but symbolically. This is the lesson of history's cruelty. Powerful women, highly visible women, women who are easy to identify with status and presence, often suffer not for personal acts, but for the fear and frustration they inspire. Marie Antoinette's execution was carefully staged to erase a queen while reinforcing the authority of a new regime. It was a message that nothing, not even royalty, could escape the machine of political retribution. And it was a reminder that society often punishes women who cannot fully conform to expectations of obedience, invisibility, or submission. Her story, reframed, is neither simple nor moralistic. She was not innocent. She was not a monster. She was a human being caught in the machinery of history. A young girl traded in political marriage, a queen watched constantly, whose every misstep became evidence, a mother whose children were leveraged against her, a woman whose body and reputation were weaponized. She became the embodiment of the system's cruelty before the executioner ever raised his hand. In the end, Marie Antoinette's life and death leave us with a sobering truth. Marie Antoinette did not die because she was powerful. She died because she was visible, and history has always been cruel to visible women. And now we want to hear from you. Was Marie Antoinette a villain or a victim of history's need for blood? Comment below and share your thoughts. If you found this video illuminating, hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the dark, hidden stories history often leaves out. Marie Antoinette's life was traded, monitored, and weaponized. Her story was written by others long before her final moments. And yet, through reflection, we can see her as more than myth, more than scandal, more than the guillotine. We can see her as a person, a young woman, and a symbol of the cruelty that power has historically inflicted on women who were forced to be visible.